Hey guys, welcome to the History of Jazz virtual lecture for today, Wednesday, August 28th. Yeah. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching this. I appreciate it, and thank you for your understanding with scheduling conflicts and whatnot. We will be meeting in person on Friday, and everything should be back to normal, relatively speaking. So let's dive right into this stuff. Your reading assigned on Monday should have taken you right up to the beginnings of minstrelsy. So we're going to focus on that. We're going to talk about minstrelsy, the blues, and ragtime today. So minstrelsy is a super important aspect of early Black American music. It is also a very controversial aspect. It is this first distinctively American genre, which is important, and that's amazing. Not only is it, the first genre in the U.S. that became worldwide, that gained worldwide acclaim, it's also a Black American music. It is a continuing melting pot of these traditions, right? West African, West European. And it is a combination of music and song, but also dancing, sketches, comic sketches, improv, drama, melodrama, and a lot of parody as well. This was sort of tied in, though, with a lot of Black people were sort of forced and or pressured to make fun of themselves, and a lot of white people would also be involved in minstrelsy, wearing what we now know as blackface, basically pretending, to be a Black person, parodying them, and often, making fun of them. So this music, while super important, was not without its obvious negative aspects. So it was a 60-year-long popular spin, though. It was popular from 1840 to 1900. So these are all things that we sort of take into consideration as we talk about the beginning of jazz music. In those aspects I mentioned of minstrelsy, dance is probably the second most important behind the music and the song. This is something that is sort of carried on through a lot of Black American music these days. We're going to see a lot of dances being written for big band music, for swing in the 30s and 40s. We're going to see dance coming back into fashion with R&B and rhythm and blues and kind of rockabilly kind of sounding stuff. We're going to see it coming back into fashion with disco and funk, and then hip hop and rap, and now pop and all these neo versions, neo funk, all that kind of stuff. So it's always been a mainstay of Black American music. The one we're going to look at is called the cakewalk, and this is like an exaggerated step making fun of high class people, hoity-toity people, right? So this is a dance that was made to sort of be a caricature of high society.
From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
So there's no audio. This is like a silent film from 1903 or something. It's very old archival footage, but you can see how they've kind of got these, kind of high knees and stepping and the elbows, and they're all kind of making fun of these well-to-do high-class people. And this was a very popular aspect of the minstrelsy, was sort of making fun of everybody, and they were allowed to get away with it. If a Black American made fun of high society in everyday life, a lot of terrible things would happen. If they did it through minstrelsy, it was, it's a caricature, okay, And so it was a way to sort of start, I guess, fighting back, but also getting comeuppance of just like being able to make fun of the people that have been pushing them down for centuries. So in this context, the poster that's on this slide, "Walking for That Cake," is a cover. It's like the front page, the title page of a piece of sheet music for a song called "Walking for That Cake," which was used for a lot of cakewalking in minstrelsy. So this was music that they would play along to or sing along to while they dance for this caricature, this idea. So not everything about minstrelsy is depressing and sad. There was also a lot of good that did come out of it. For instance, vaudeville and Broadway. We wouldn't have most musical genres in the U.S. without Black Americans, and in this context, we would not have Broadway, right? We would not have Hamilton, Wicked, Lion King, Oklahoma, Chicago, you name it, Rent, whatever, without minstrelsy. So modern musical theater was born out of it, and it was replaced eventually by vaudeville in the late 19th century. And this was a similar idea to minstrelsy, but with a lot less of the overtly racist elements of it. And it was a little bit less like a song and dance variety show, and sort of started turning more into the theater that we know. So it started out as this kind of comic sketch, drama, funny dancing, making fun of themselves and other people, kind of almost sport gestury kind of show, to a little more structured musical theater dancing. There was still, there were still elements of minstrelsy in it, but it was more structured and taken more seriously. And then from vaudeville came, Broadway and other things. So a lot of early musicians in vaudeville, like Bessie Smith, who we're going to talk about in a minute here, helped a lot of early jazz get started and helped those musicians by, hiring them to play for their vaudeville shows. And then these musicians would meet each other and they would form bands. So truly vaudeville is the birth, minstrelsy, and then vaudeville is the birth of, almost everything. Okay, let's turn our attention over to ragtime. So that's, we have the three elements here that are making up jazz. We have vaudeville and minstrelsy, we have ragtime, we have the blues. So ragtime. This is, again, a melting pot genre that was popular in the late 1800s, the late 19th century, into the early 1900s. It is a purely piano style of music. It is a solo piano genre. And it is very unique sounding. You've probably heard ragtime before. You probably have called it just like old cowboy music or something. Or not cowboy, but like old saloon music, right? It was very popular in this kind of, idea of a person walking into a saloon with the double doors and you hear the piano playing. A lot of that was ragtime. So in the right hand, when you play the piano, right, you've got all these complicated rhythmic melodies, what we call syncopated, right? And then in the left hand, you've got a lot of what we would call march style, so just like really strong downbeats, right? And then you put those together and you have what we call ragtime. The two important elements of this: one, it's not improvised, and two, it's not swung. So we're going to listen to a musical example in a minute here, kind of showing the difference between those two. But in terms of improvisation, minstrelsy was improvised. Vaudeville was improvised to some extent. And obviously jazz will be improvised. And a lot of Black American music is improvised in some fashion. Even in modern music, a lot of rappers and artists and musicians who do hip hop and rap do freestyling, right? Improvising. It is present in a lot of Black American music and has been for over 100 years. So ragtime is the exception to the rule, and this is because it is more in line with the European tradition than the Western African tradition. It has both, but it's more in that area. It was said that it premiered at the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893. There is not a whole lot of evidence. That was a long, long time ago, and also there has been a lot of historical strife with not keeping records of Black American history. It's hard to find the birthdays or death days of a lot of Black Americans. So in that vein, it's kind of hard to see where ragtime officially started. It is said to have started in Chicago at basically what would become the World Fair, if you know about that. And that does make sense because right after this exposition, ragtime started popping up in a lot of saloons and a lot of music stores, and a lot of plazas and concert hall, or not concert halls, but areas of playing around the country. So it would make sense that this is where it started. It took the whole country by force. It was a brand new, crazy thing to hear. And this was the first time that a purely black American influenced form of music dominated the U.S. So minstrelsy was popular and it was a black American music, but it was started by white people. And it was meant to be a caricature, right? It was meant to be making fun of black people, and they would make fun of themselves and others, and et cetera. This was a black American, African American people made this music and then premiered it, and then the U.S. said, "Oh, we love this," right? So this is an important aspect. So we have the sort of most important ragtime performer and creator, composer, everything is Scott Joplin. And you may have heard of this guy before. He is, I would say, probably the only ragtime musician you need to know about at the moment. He is from Texarkana, and he was around in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and was a classically trained pianist, which was great but unusual for a black American from the South. And part of that lends to this credence of ability and popularity that a black man from Texas got classically trained in piano and then helped create a new genre that was black American music that then became nationwide in popularity. That's amazing, So he sort of is the epitome of ragtime, and most of the compositions we know from ragtime are his. And a lot of the music that he wrote would become popular for the next generation of jazz musicians or blues musicians. So if you know George Gershwin, if you know Duke Ellington, if you know Lil Hardin Armstrong, these musicians started out as what we call song pluggers, and a song plugger was just like an advertiser for music. There was no Spotify, there was no computer, no radio, no phones, no digital ads, no, barely even a decent running newspaper at the time. And a better way to advertise music than on a newspaper was just to play it. So people like George Gershwin, as a younger person, or Duke or Lil Hardin Armstrong, would sit outside of a music store in Brooklyn, Harlem, Chicago, New Orleans, whatever, with a piano that rolled out of the store, and they would literally play ragtime, and then somebody would walk by and say, "What the hell is that?" And they would say, "Oh, that's The Entertainer by Scott Joplin. I'm playing it right now. Come buy it." And then they'd walk into the store and buy the music. So it was like an early form of advertising for music. So Scott Joplin is responsible for a lot of that music writing, the compositions that would become part of the advertiser's repertoire, basically. So let's check out Maple Leaf Rag. This is sort of the most popular tune that he wrote. And you've almost certainly heard this at some point. It shows up in a lot of media. It shows up in a lot of it's been sampled, it's been on TV, movies, etc. People have talked about it. It's a very famous piece of music. Things to think about as we listen to this. The left hand is going to be playing very downbeat heavy ideas, so bump, 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 very on the beat, right? And it's all going to be in the bass, the lower part of the piano. And chords as well. The right hand is going to be playing syncopated melodies, so that's what it just means rhythmically complex, right? So not just bum 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 bum. It's going to be a lot more bum bum ba da 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 ba da 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 da. A lot of these ideas that are going to be a lot more involved in the right hand. It's going to be on the higher part of the piano on the right side, and it's going to basically fit in between the left hand, right? So let's check this out. super fascinating, right? And this kind of visual element is great for, you know, seeing exactly what the left hand and right hand are doing. So if we look at it, right, this left hand is playing a lot of the, I should do that, is playing a lot of these kind of block chords over here, right? Like we get to the, there we go, yeah, do that. That's very ragtime heavy, is what I was trying to say. A lot of these ideas are, you know, the right hand will play these notes in between while the left hand is playing these kind of like downbeats. Sorry. Anyways, so now I want to check out this variation, this other recording of Maple Leaf Rag. And this is a jazz musician that we're going to talk about either on Friday or next week, called Jelly Roll Morton. That is his name. I don't know that anyone has ever found out his birth name, but the name that he went by was Jelly Roll Morton. And he was an early jazz musician, a ragtime player, and also kind of an inventor of what we now know as jazz. One of the first, you know, along with Louis Armstrong and some guys you may not know like Buddy Bolden and Lil Hardin Armstrong, who was Louis's wife, and you know, George Gershwin, Sidney Bechet, Vic Spiderback, some of these other older names. Louis and Jelly Roll are like the two really big ones, right? So this is going to be a version of Maple Leaf Rag as Jelly Roll Morton plays it, and I want you to, excuse me, think about the differences between what we just heard and what he's going to do. So first, he's going to start by playing it how he thinks ragtime players play it, and then he's going to talk for a second, and then he's going to play his own version. So.
tune. I had played it, I guess, long before I went to the state of Missouri. And I played it in different tempo. That is on the version of my creation of jazz music. In fact, I changed every style to mine. difference. How much of a help you got on that line?
Yeah, so that's very different, right? That's extremely different than what we heard before. So, first, surface observations. It's not the right notes, technically speaking, right? It sounds different. It's like a similar language to what you know. You might be able to figure out like the roots of some things, like most of somebody's sentence, but it still sounds kind of weird to you, kind of odd. This is maple leaf rag, but it isn't, right? So, if we go to over somewhere, that kind of ba-da-da-da-da-da, that whole thing kind of sounds like the little A section from the original. It's similar, right? You can kind of hear it's there. It's just different, right? Jelly Roll is improvising. He's taking the song that he knows and he's playing notes around it that sound similar but different, right? Also, another surface observation, it's swung, right? The original is dun 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 da 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 da, and this one is bum ba ba da 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 da. It's kind of got a more of a lilt to it, kind of almost lazier sounding in some of the notes. Do 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 do, right? That's that kind of swung feeling, which we'll talk about more as we get into it. And as it can be hard to hear because this is a very old recording, which is amazing, right? This is from like the 20s, I believe. Incredible that we have recordings surviving that long, but it's also hard to hear what he's saying. But in the first 30 seconds or so, it was super fast, right? That was just like, that is what he was saying in Missouri. They play ragtime like that. So it's like the original, just faster, right? And then in here, he was kind of saying, that's how they play it. This is the way I play it and the way I invented jazz. Which is different, right? So, fascinating stuff. Jelly Roll is a super important musician, somebody we will get into later as well. But it's also great to just be able to hear the differences between both versions of Maple Leaf Rag. Kind of start getting that idea in your head of going from Kasuankura, that West African Ghanaian drumming piece, to Daniel, kind of the spiritual idea, call and response with a choir, field holler, shout, singing in the fields while working through slavery, right, or being a slave and working, to the kind of religious songs, to adding that kind of mixture of European and Western African styles with There's No Hiding Place, Marian Anderson, right, that kind of like opera-sounding folk song, to minstrelsy and vaudeville, like musical theater, right, early musical theater, to ragtime, which is, more syncopated but not improvised. And now we've gotten to Jelly Roll Morton doing ragtime, and that becomes a lot more of what we would call jazz. So just really fascinating in two classes of time, basically, right? And like, let's say, it is a couple hundred years from Kasuankura technically to ragtime, but let's say 100 years or so from the spirituals to ragtime and Jelly Roll Morton doing ragtime. It's fascinating how quickly the music evolves. So now let's turn our attention to the final third root here, the blues. A lot of you probably already know about the blues or something about it. It's a very popular style of music still. A lot of guitarists these days, popular guitarists, use a lot of blues when they play. The example that goes off the top of my head is John Mayer is a big lover of the blues, and so a lot of the songs that he plays and sings, especially something like if you know the song Gravity or Vultures, that kind of stuff. He's got a bunch of other ones as well, of course. He uses a lot of what they call blues licks, so just he's playing a lot of blues vocabulary, a lot of stuff you would sing or play in the blues in his own music. So very influenced. There are plenty of musicians, right? Not just him, right? B.B. King, Stevie Ray Vaughan, a million people, so many. Susan Tedeschi, thousands of them. So very important style of music, and kind of the missing third one out of ragtime and vaudeville, minstrelsy, and now here. It was pretty widespread in the U.S. by the late 19th century, much like ragtime and minstrelsy and vaudeville. And it was great for the common person, the everyday person of the U.S., because it didn't take much to be able to sing the blues. It is super expressive and personal, and it's also pretty simple. It is 12 bars and 3 chords. That's it. And if you don't have much frame of reference for that, a lot of pop songs have way more than 12 bars in them, and more than 3 chords generally. Some of them may only have 4 or 5, but a lot of music these days is still more complex than the blues, which is not an insult to the blues. It's just a lot of blues is meant to be simple and expressive. So let's talk about then the musicians. So we've got Mamie Smith, we've got Gertrude Ma Rainey, we've got Robert Johnson, we've got W.C. Handy. These are all important blues musicians. W.C. Handy is considered the father or the godfather of blues. Robert Johnson is like a Delta blues guy, and he's the one who, if you've ever heard about this guy like going down to the Delta to sell his soul for being good at music, that's Robert Johnson. There's this whole idea that he came up to the crossroads and found the devil, offered to sell his soul in exchange for being a great musician. That's the Robert Johnson thing, Gertrude Ma Rainey wrote a lot of songs that Elvis, let's say, covered, to be generous. She wrote a lot of music. I think she may have written Hound Dog and a bunch of that kind of stuff. And Mamie Smith, another super important Delta blues musician. So all these guys are super important to the creation of jazz as we know it. Let's go and talk about Bessie Smith one more time. She was someone we talked about when we mentioned vaudeville and minstrelsy, right? She was an early vaudeville musician. She was a singer, and she would basically influence and convince the runners, the owners of these vaudeville groups to hire early jazz musicians like Louis Armstrong or Jelly Roll Morton, to play in vaudeville, and then that would get them enough money and fame and fortune to go do their own thing. So Bessie was a mover and a shaker, We're going to listen, the final thing we're going to do today is we're going to listen to her version of Backwater Blues. And this was a song she wrote as well. It was sort of like not a dirge, but it was for a disaster in the U.S. In the early 20th century, there was a terrible flood in Mississippi, in the lowlands, middle south U.S., right? And a lot of Black Americans got displaced because of it. A lot of Black and African Americans didn't really have good homes in the first place due to Jim Crow and a hell of a lot of racism and still rampant slavery up until, right? And these homes that were not well built in the first place for them got destroyed through flooding. So a lot of Black Americans were displaced. And Betsy sort of wrote this song for them, and it became a very popular song. It kind of became like not a rallying cry, but it became a support song, And it's going to have the blues form, which I'll talk about as we go through it, and it's going to have this piano player named James P. Johnson, who we will get to in the future, kind of playing with her. So we'll talk about her in a second here, but let's listen to this and just think about the blues form.
When it rained 5 days and the skies turned dark as night. When it rained 5 days and the skies turned dark as night. Then trouble taking place in the lowlands at night. I woke up this morning a poor girl wonder where she wanna go. Then they rowed a little boat about 5 miles across the pond. Then they rowed a little boat about 5 miles across the pond. I packed all my clothes, threw them in, and they rowed me along.
So this song will go on for, quite some time. We went through a few verses already, but it's the same song just repeated over and over. You notice it's the same ba da 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 da. That's the melody, right? We heard it one time, we heard it 2 times, we heard it 3 times. That's going to keep going over and over and over until enough verses have been sung that they feel like the song is done, So, in addition to that melody being repeated, there's also the lyrics, and it's hard to hear the lyrics because, again, this is an old recording, but in essence, Bessie is saying, when it rained 5 days and the sky turned to dark as night, right? So remember, this is about like a huge flood, right? A huge storm. So she sings, when it rained 5 days and the sky turned to dark as night. And then the piano plays something. And then again she sings, when it rained 5 days and the sky turned to dark as night. Piano plays something. And then she says, then trouble's taken place in the lowlands at night. So this is the 12-bar form. So when it rained 5 days and the sky turned dark as night is an A. Oh, there it is. A. That's A, right? Then she's going to sing it again. When it rained 5 days and the sky turned dark as night, that's the second A. And then trouble's taking place in the lowlands at night is B, right? So that's that AAB form. It's 4 measures of each little section. 4 measures of when it rained 5 days and the sky turned dark as night. When it rained 5 days and the sky turned dark as night. And then trouble's taking place in the lowlands at night. That's 12 bars, right? 3 sections, 4 bars each. And you can do that as many times as you want. And it also kind of lends to this call and response thing, right? It's call, response, AAB, right? I hope that's starting to make sense. The last element of it is then you've heard the melody and you've heard the lyrics. Now think about what the accompaniment is doing. So now listen to what the piano does in the song. Think about what the piano is doing when Bessie sings, and then listen to what the piano is doing when she's not singing.
When it rained 5 days and the sky turned dark as night. When it rained 5 days and the sky turned dark as night. Then trouble taking place in the lowlands at night.
Right, so anytime she's not singing, the piano goes da 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 da, these little trills, right, with the hand. But then when she comes back, it's all very simple.
Then trouble taking place in the lowlands at night.
So once again, that's this idea of call and response. So a lot of layers of the call and response, from the lyrics and the melody to the piano kind of playing back and forth. And as we get more into playing a blues with a jazz group, like a quartet or something, or a trio, or whatever, piano, bass, and drums, that's going to be more prevalent with drums and bass playing against the piano, that kind of thing. So I believe that is it. We went through minstrelsy and vaudeville, right? Talking about these dances and kind of the elements of how minstrelsy turned into vaudeville and that turns into Broadway. We talked about ragtime and how that was kind of the odd one out in that it's not swung, it's very straight, it's not improvised, and it's also a piano thing. And then we talked about Scott Joplin and how this recording of Jelly Roll Morton down here is way different and kind of shows this early jazz sound. And then we finished up by talking about the blues and these musicians and Bessie Smith, and all of these elements are going to turn into what we know as jazz. So thank you so much for your, if any of you made it to the end of this, all three of you maybe, I don't know. Thank you. Appreciate it. So on the schedule of units in Canvas is going to have your reading. I think it's like pages 39 to 54, and then a few more tracks. All of those tracks are just the ones we have been listening to. So, if you need a refresher on them, take a listen to them. It is a lot of reading, but it goes by pretty quick when you get into it, especially because a lot of it is similar to what we talk about in the lecture. So, and it should, and then we'll be ready for Friday. So. On Friday, we should start talking about Chapter 2, I believe. So none of this will be covered in Friday. We'll just be going straight on to new stuff. So thank you so much. Any questions, give me an email. Thank you for understanding again, and I'll see you on Friday.